We are the Institute for Intuitive Intelligence, revolutionizing intuition by training spiritually fierce women globally as qualified intuitive guides. Subscribe for the leading research and teachings on the conversation of intuition development. Hey, dear beloveds. I am so delighted to be with you today for this mini masterclass. And it's an oldie but a goodie. And I think I mean oldie as in it's classic. It's a classic ground for spiritual wisdom. There is probably not a teacher on this planet who doesn't have a perspective on what I'm going to share with you today. And I'm sharing it through the lens of intuition because, of course, that's my work and my service. And I want to talk today about perception. Now, this is a topic, as I say, that is not something new to me. It isn't rare or uncommon, but I believe that we can often lose sight of perception and the creation of reality when we come into the conversation around intuition. I'm just going to bring up this so I can see if there's any comments or questions as I go along. So where I want to go with this is really to begin with this idea that it is the perception as an expression of our consciousness or the phase of our spiritual maturity that will determine the quality of our lived experience. So when we talk about perception, we are really in the simplest terms talking about how we perceive the world that is around us. And it is through that perception that we both receive the world and we create the world. So it isn't an act of perception that's happening in isolation. We know from quantum physics that we are in a participatory universe, and that means that what you observe through that lens of perception or belief is what will be made manifest. We call this collapsing the wave function. So there are no watchers in the quantum field. You are not ever neutrally or objectively observing reality, although that is sort of the end goal of our spiritual seeking, is that we get to the point where we're able to perceive what is through the lens of neutrality. That learned detachment is our spiritual freedom. Most of us are walking around in a prison of our own making, and that prison is the level of perception that we're bringing to the world. Okay, so let me bring this to you in another way, because it's so important, and it's so important when we bring it into the conversation around intuition. So let's do that now. When we go to see a psychic or an intuitive guide, or we have an intuitive friend, or we draw an oracle card, or we tune into our own innate intuition and just connect directly, which is how I encourage you to work with it, there is perhaps a sense that that knowledge or wisdom that you gain from your intuition exists outside of reality, somewhere a priori to this experience, and that we're tapping into truth. And we're tapping into a form of knowledge that cannot be questioned because of the fact that it comes from something higher or greater than our, little human experience. And I would love to say that's true, but it isn't. When we are seeking from our own intuition or seeking the wisdom of another to tune into our intuitive knowing, we are only able to do that through the lens of our perception. And the lens of our perception is a reflection of the level of our consciousness, which is why we never want to stop awakening or evolving our consciousness. That is the very function of our life. The end point of an awakened consciousness is that I am God, God is me, all is one. But we are all on a path towards that truth, because that is the absolute purpose of life. Not all of us are there. In fact, I would say the majority of the planet are not there. And so when we are perceiving our intuition, that innate wisdom, we can only receive it through the lens of our perception. It doesn't have the capacity to override whatever limitations we are perceiving reality through. So in other words, the story that we tell about the world that we live in and ourselves is the lens through which our intuition will also be received. It's the lens through which we both give and receive, and as such create reality. Remembering it's a torus, the toroidal field, that beautiful donut shape. To give is to receive. I feel like we're covering a lot here, but I really want to stick with this because this is sort of
well, it is absolutely critical and advanced insight into why we may feel as though our intuition has gone wrong, or that the wisdom that we receive from someone and ends up being or not being right. The whole other side of that is, of course, is that collapsed wave function, that when we hear someone else's opinion of our life, through whether they call it intuition or not, we will perhaps come on board with that, and we will make our reality in accordance with that story. We are a collection of the stories that we tell about ourselves in the world. That is what perception is. And those stories are largely subconscious. They aren't the stories that we tell in our waking life, although they can also be, but they're the stories that are running beneath the surface of our conscious reasoning mind all of the time, and if you like, magnetizing that reality towards us. And so it goes when we seek out our intuition. We are only able to receive it at the level that our consciousness has matured to. So our task on the path of awakening, and our task as intuitive intelligence trainers, the women I train inside of the Institute, is to take our consciousness to the highest possible level that we're able to take it at any given time. Because the more we move back to that truth that I am God, I am one with the one mind, the more I will perceive the world through that lens. And when I have unmet subconscious programs, I can only perceive the world through that faulty lens. It doesn't mean it's 100% wrong, but it certainly means that I am casting a certain light on what I receive. We see this all of the time when people will share their experience of the same situation through their lens and recount something very, very different. Or two people in an argument will have a completely different perspective on what it is that is going on and how it's unfolding and who's right and who's wrong. When we move into our spiritual maturity, our spiritual agency, that movement towards that awakened consciousness, we are setting aside that judgment of right or wrong. We're setting aside the perception of reality as broken, or some things are good and some things are bad. And we're moving into that learned detachment. Life is, I am. And my use or my accessing of my intuition is then no longer in an attempt to manipulate or control reality to behave in a certain kind of way, but a surrender into that truth. The more I move towards my awakened consciousness, the more loving my perception of reality is. The more I sit in my unmet subconscious fear programs, the more my perception of reality is informed by those unmet subconscious fear programs, as is the receipt of my intuition. So when we're speaking about intuition in the Institute, we're speaking specifically about non-local intuition, and that idea of that infinite one mind wisdom. All time and space is one, and that's what I'm accessing. We're not talking about the biological implicit knowledge or energetic sensitivity forms of intuition, which I won't go into today, but really about accessing that infinite one mind consciousness. What I want us to take away from this, and what really, really matters to me, is be mindful of the stories that you tell consciously of your reality and of your identity, but be even more mindful of the subconscious programs that are running beneath the surface. And how do we do that? How do we be mindful of what is beneath the surface? Well, that is through the commitment to the awakened path. And that is through stillness, silence, and solitude, not running around like a headless chicken in the world, but creating the space of devotion, of stepping into the places where our subconscious can reveal itself to us, and where we can transmute those suffering stories through handing it over, really just making space for it to be the self-cleaning machine that it is. That is what our subconscious is designed to do. But when we never provide the conditions in our life to allow the subconscious to purge itself, we then become very invested in those rising stories, and we can actually re-traumatize ourselves and force them back down and create more issues rather than less, through this ideal of self-awareness, which in fact is not an ideal unless there is the full release of that little t trauma from the subconscious, and the big T trauma as well. So I know we've gone a lot of places here, but for me, this is vital to a spiritually mature intuition, an intuition that is actually working with the quantum nature of reality, and isn't about the trinkets and superstitions of the New Age. The perception of your own intuition, of the non-local, non-dominant senses of that ether, or if you like, the field all around us, through a a lens that is stuck in stories of separation will only be able to tell stories of separation, even if that knowledge is intuited. Whatever wisdom arrives will then have to be projected through that lens. So if the psychic you seek out, or the intuitive intelligence trainer you seek out, or any other kind of healer is calling on their intuition, and they aren't doing the deep work of a deep faith, then they will tell you the story of a broken world. They will tell you stories of separation. They will meet your littleness in the information they share with you, because that is what they have to offer. That is the lens through which they are receiving their intuition. And they will absolutely believe the truth of it. And for them, it is true, as far as they've been able to take their consciousness. So our aim is constantly to commit to the raising of our consciousness beyond where we currently are, to return to that unified mind, that one mind, and to overcome those places of separation. There's so much I could share here, and I've done lots of sharing in different places around deep states of intuition versus shallow states of intuition. But the key to all of this is really that understanding that consciousness is the lens that, consciousness is the lens through which we receive our intuition, and that consciousness is informed by our perception of reality. So if you are seeing a mad, bad, scary world, then you're in judgment, and that judgment is causing separation, which is causing you to stay in that immature state of consciousness, and then that is all you can afford to offer others. So commit to your own practices of meeting and releasing your limiting beliefs and behaviors in the world, so that you can literally raise your consciousness and get closer to that one mind, and therefore what you share for yourself or on behalf of others will be as close to truth with the big T that it possibly can be. Thank you for joining me. So much love to you all. I'm feel like there'll be more sharing around the understanding of perception, and the way that works as the lens for how we can receive our intuition. If you are committed to receiving your intuition and elevating and accelerating that consciousness raising process to the highest possible order, then I encourage you to put your name on the wait list for the 3rd level. The next round begins July 2021. We begin interviews for those on the wait list from April 12, and for April 19 for anyone else. So if you are seeking to really move into that spiritual maturity with your intuitive intelligence, and to be of service in the highest possible way, training in this program for a year will bring about all of that change and acceleration that you desire in understanding your most important form of intelligence. So much love to you all.